These are the 10 fastest fighter planes of the Second World War ranked by their real top speed. One of them could hit 700 miles an hour. Another was so unstable it killed more pilots than the enemy did. And one British plane flew so fast its wings bent in midair and helped engineers break the sound barrier later on. I'm starting at number 10 with the P-51 Mustang, and by the end you'll see why the fastest plane in the entire war also turned out to be completely useless. The P-51 Mustang is pretty much legendary in World War II circles. Once this thing was on your tail, you weren't getting away. That's how most airmen put it at the time. It was fast, could pull off maneuvers most enemy fighters just couldn't match, and it turned Allied bombing raids from disasters into real threats. It could carry up to 2,000 pounds of bombs, but the real magic was in the range. It was over 2,200 kilometers, which meant it could actually fly alongside the bombers all the way, protect them, and still get home. The early versions were decent, but once they switched to the British-made Merlin 61 engine, the plane just turned into a monster. That upgrade gave it the speed and altitude to dominate, and it's why so many people call it the plane that won the war. The name comes from those wild ponies out in the American West, fitting honestly for a fighter that basically ran free over Europe. The Corsair is a late-war legend. It was actually the first U.S. fighter to go over 400 miles per hour, and it made its name in the Pacific. Those bent gull wings weren't just for looks, they kept drag down and made room for a massive propeller. On paper, it was a pilot's dream. Super fast, handled well, and the roll rate was ridiculous. But in practice, it had issues. The engine was so powerful that at low speed, it could twist the whole plane upside down if you weren't careful. Visibility was also awful. Trying to land on an aircraft carrier, you'd basically be guessing. Pilots had a bunch of nicknames for it. Grunts called it the Angel of Okinawa, but the guys who flew it called it the Bent Wing Bastard or the Ensign Eliminator because so many rookie pilots crashed and burned trying to fly it. Still, the F4U's performance made up for the risks, and that's why it's still flying in air shows and aerobatic teams even today. This was the first jet bomber of World War II, and Hitler called it one of Germany's wonder weapons. He thought it could save the war. In reality, though, most of the time the R-234 was used for reconnaissance, flying so fast it was rarely even spotted, let alone caught. When it did do bombing runs, nobody could intercept it. There just wasn't anything that could keep up in level flight. But it had some big issues. The engines were fragile, needed replacing after just 25 hours in the air, sometimes less. Takeoff was a nightmare, and a lot of crashes happened before it even left the ground. The early prototypes didn't have normal landing gear. Instead, they took off on a jettisonable three-wheel trolley, then landed on skids. Pilots said it felt like landing on soap. The bomber version eventually got real landing gear, and takeoff problems were mostly solved with rocket-assisted takeoff. But by then, the Blitz had missed its chance to make a real impact. The 335, also known as the Arrow, was the fastest piston engine plane of its era. The design is what makes it stand out. It's got one engine in front, one in the back, running in a push-pull setup. This basically killed the nasty torque effect you get in most prop planes. But the unusual layout made ejection a problem. If the pilot tried to bail out, he'd risk getting pulled right into the rear propeller. The solution? The 335 was built to jettison the tail fin and rear prop so the pilot could actually get out safely. This is the absolute peak of British piston engine technology. De Havilland Hornet F1 could hit 475 miles per hour, highest speed ever recorded in a British-made piston engine plane. What made the Hornet special was its handling. Eric Brown, a guy who flew more types of planes than anyone else, called it a Ferrari in the sky. He said you could do anything you wanted using just one of the Hornet's engines, let alone both. It was built as a successor to the Mosquito, with long-range operations in mind for the Far East. But by the time it was ready, the war was already over, and it didn't get a chance to see combat in World War II. Even so, the Hornet ended up with a pretty solid career in later conflicts. So it never got that legendary combat reputation, but in terms of pure performance and design, nothing else from the British Piston era matched it. This was Germany's last-ditch attempt at a mass-produced jet right near the end of the war. Top speed was 495 miles per hour, about 430 knots, which is insane for the time. The He 162 was part of the Volksjäger program, meant to be put together fast by almost anyone, including forced labor, with as little metal as possible. So they built most of it out of wood. The thing weighed just about 2,000 kilos and was designed to be totally expendable. Too expensive to repair, just toss it if it broke. By this stage of the war, the Luftwaffe was running on fumes. They were out of fuel, out of pilots, just getting hammered by Allied bombers. The plan was to have Hitler Youth fly the He 162s, kids with barely any training, just pure loyalty. That thankfully never really happened. Most of the Salamanders were flown by experienced pilots, at least until their airfields got overrun. The He 162 was dangerous, but not for the reasons you'd expect. It only stayed in the air for about half an hour, and it was seriously unstable. Most of the fatalities came from the plane itself, not from enemy action. The Messerschmitt Me 262, also called the Swallow, was the only jet fighter that actually saw air-to-air combat in World War II. If it had entered service earlier, the war in the skies might have looked completely different. But it only showed up in the last couple of years, so it was too late to really change the outcome, even though it still made a serious dent. 509 Allied planes shot down, just 100 Me 262s lost. Powered by two Junkers Jumo turbojets, the Me 262 looked way ahead of its time. It could hit 490 knots, or about 560 miles per hour, fast enough to outrun just about anything, including the Mosquito in level flight. It carried 24 air-to-air rockets, so it had more than enough firepower. One German pilot even said flying it was like being a god. The Me 262 basically showed everyone that jets were the future. Planes like the MiG-15 and the Sabre F-86 came directly out of what the Swallow did in combat. Next up is the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, the first jet fighter used by the American Air Forces. This project was so secret that only 5 out of more than 130 people working on it even knew what they were actually building. At one point, an engineer was detained by police because Lockheed couldn't vouch for him. That's how tight they kept the lid. The P-80 was America's answer to the Me 262. The U.S. used a lot of British jet engine research and had Lockheed build a competitor from scratch. The first prototype got the nickname Lulu Bell, and it made such an impression that the P-80 stayed in production for 15 years. It didn't really see action during the war, but 2 pre-production versions did fly missions in Italy right at the end. And in 1947, a modified Shooting Star set a speed record, 624 miles per hour. Top speed was 516 knots, or about 594 miles per hour. For the U.S., this was the start of the jet era. The Supermarine Spitfire is the icon of World War II and the Battle of Britain. This is the plane everyone pictures when they think of British aviation. Top speed was 526 knots, or 606 miles per hour, faster than most of today's commercial jets. People loved this aircraft. It was fast, it was beautiful, and it was apparently a joy to fly. The name Spitfire actually came from the daughter of Supermarine's chairman. Designer R.J. Mitchell wasn't a fan. He called it the sort of bloody silly name they would give it. Official top speed is listed at 606 miles per hour, but in April 1944, one pilot managed to hit 620 miles per hour after a safety device failed. The propeller ripped off, the plane went into a dive, and it actually reached more than Mach 0.92, which is 92% of the speed of sound. The pilot, Martindale, got knocked out during that dive and woke up at 40,000 feet with the wings completely bent. Funny enough, the way those wings got battered ended up helping other planes break the sound barrier later on. This is hands down the fastest plane to see action in World War II, the Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet. Top speed was 610 knots or 702 miles per hour, which is just ridiculous for the time. It was rocket-powered, totally ahead of its time, and set a world speed record in 1941. 3 years later, it broke its own record, hitting 702 miles per hour in a dive. Flying this thing was dangerous. Pilots had to go through special high-pressure training just so they wouldn't pass out at altitude. And that was only part of the danger. The Komet was known for just exploding on its own, thanks to the rocket fuel. Flight time was only about 7 minutes. Allied pilots would actually just wait for it to run out of fuel, then follow it back and strafe the airfield. Originally, the Komet's guns were only good at short range, so they later added the SG-500 Jagdfaust, which literally means hunting fist. It was 6 recoilless 50mm mortars that automatically fired when the plane flew under an enemy bomber. It was a technical marvel, but in practice, the Me 163 only shot down 16 planes. The Germans pulled it from service a month before the end of the war. So even though it was the fastest fighter in the Second World War, it also goes down as one of the worst, fast, dangerous, and almost completely useless in combat.